This is monumental, Elizabeth. We've been covering this case for 2 months, really for more than a year at this point in time. We are seeing about the actual verdict here. And just for the, I want to understand, count one was the most serious charge, carrying up to a life sentence. He has been found not guilty of racketeering conspiracy RICO, not guilty. He's also been found not guilty of sex trafficking of Cassandra Ventura. She testified for days. We're also learning that he's been found guilty of the transportation to engage in prostitution count involving Cassie Ventura. He has been found not guilty of sex trafficking of Jane, who is the girlfriend that he was dating as well, and guilty of the transportation to engage in prostitution. Now, Elizabeth, this is very, very significant. We had an inkling yesterday when there was a hung jury on the initial RICO charge, the most serious, that there might be an actual acquittal there or a hung jury. The prosecution insisted on having it keep going. The defense wanted it to keep going. And now we know they have a result. It is a not guilty verdict. Talk to me more broadly here, because the Prostitution Acts, people thought it was kind of a low-hanging fruit. He was found guilty of those, but not sex trafficking of Cassie.
This is the best possible outcome for the defense. This is what, of course they wanted a full acquittal, but if you're not getting a full acquittal, this is what they wanted. Their client is now not facing life in prison. He is facing 2 separate charges that he was convicted on. Serious charges. They each carry a maximum of 10 years. So this isn't nothing that we are talking about, but the most serious charges he has been acquitted on. As Laura said, days of testimony from Cassie Ventura, from Jane, Cassie being on the stand for 4 days, Jane being on the stand for 6 days, these women crying, breaking down on the stand. Well, guess what? The jury did not believe most of their story, or even if they believed most of their story, it did not line up with those charges. So,
and by the way, on that point, let's talk a little bit about that, because there was an inkling for those people who had been in the courtroom, including ourselves, who had been watching the testimony. Remember what they were using as the defense to counter the sex trafficking. It was free will. They were talking about free will, and they were suggesting, while the prosecution said any bait and switch or manipulation to coerce these women by fraud or threat or otherwise to engage in these so-called freak-offs, that force, that cloud of force and threat and violence that had hung over the head of Cassie Ventura was enough to suggest that she never could develop the free will to say no. And when it came to Jane, the idea of manipulating her to travel to places like New York under the pretenses of quality time and shopping, only to then engage in freak-offs, was enough of manipulation. Well, the defense, was very clear. They kept saying free will. These are grown women making grown-up decisions who have an interest in engaging in this behavior. It seems that the jurors, maybe looking at text messages or testimony, agreed with that sentiment.
Absolutely, and we were just talking about some of those text messages that came in, and let's dig into them a little bit deeper. As I said, nothing about this is black and white. I have covered many high-profile sex crimes cases with famous defendants, and the concept of consent can be very hard for a jury to understand, especially when you have text messages that say, I want to do this freak off. Now, again, these women on the stand said that they texted those things to simply placate Sean Combs because they were scared of him. Because especially in Cassie Ventura's case, remember, this is a woman who was physically beaten. Our team got that on video, and the jury saw that numerous times.
By the way, the jury is leaving the courtroom right now. Their job is done right now. So the duty done. They have been there for 7 weeks, and they just left the courtroom.
This is, really, it is a stunning turn of events. It's a quick deliberation. A quick turn of events from yesterday when they were deadlocked. But also remember, this is the beginning of day 3. This jury reached a verdict in under 15 hours after hearing 2 months of testimony. So really a stunning outcome. Again, I would anticipate that the defense is quite happy right now. But Sean Combs will still be serving prison time.
Yes.
These are still 2 charges that each carry 10 years. Now, Laura, I actually want to hear, as a former federal prosecutor, how much time, and you may not want to make this prediction, but how much of that time do you anticipate that he would serve? What do you think that the judge may sentence him at, with each of these charges carrying 10 years each?
A great question. First, let me just dab the sweat off my brow, because let me tell you something. I was sprinting from the court trying to get here for this moment because I was so eager to understand what the actual verdict would be that I'm literally doing an affair to remember sprint through the streets of Manhattan trying to get here. And on the way, people were asking, is there a verdict? Through the streets of Manhattan. That's how people have been viewing this particular case. And here's the thing. After almost 8 weeks, the SDNY has a success rate of conviction of over 90%. It's actually over, I think, 95%. So think, the resources that are being used in this case. More than what? It was 6 prosecutors, including Maureen Comey, a top prosecutor in the SDNY who handled Ghislaine Maxwell and other infamous cases as well. For almost 8 weeks, the devotion of resources and time and energy and cost resulting in prostitution-related charges. Now, that might be a black eye if people are thinking about the rate of conviction, but they believed in their case, and now they'll go forward knowing that the jury, who they must respect, has found only this one. But here's the thing. 10 years is possible, but for a first-time offender of any crime like this, it could be as little as 2 years in prison as well. Now, they could run consecutively, meaning back to back as opposed to concurrently, but that is something that we're not talking about the maximum per se, and this judge will have discretion. Here's what will happen now. He will set a sentencing date. He will have a probation report that is coming up, and over this probation report, he is going to essentially figure out issues of remorse and recidivism, which is a fancy way of saying, will they commit the crime again? He'll look at the different factors that are in play for sentencing guidelines. This is federal court, and he will draw a conclusion on that. He will not walk out a free man today at all, but he knows right now the possibility of life without the rest of his life is no longer on the table. Prostitution, though, is, and I have to say, I'm a little surprised in a way. Although this was low-hanging fruit to have the prostitution, because, again, there was almost a guffaw heard around the world when they said, no, I didn't pay these male escorts for sex, I paid them for their time. And the defense said, well, that's what it was, and they weren't always paid if they didn't perform. But they didn't actually call a single male escort who traveled across state lines. They called 2 who were in this area and who also talked about their sexual performance. But did that surprise you that really this came down to the documents alone?
It came down to the documents, and I think that was obviously incredibly effective for the jury, because again, when they are seeing flight records that show said sex worker went from Atlanta to New York, that's pretty clear cut and dry that you are traveling across state lines. So it did come down to that evidence, to the documents, because you are right, Laura, not only did they not call any male sex workers who traveled across state lines, but also none of these sex workers called themselves prostitutes. So that is, you bring up a really, really good point, that these male escorts on the stand, they were not saying, yes, now in hindsight, I realize that I was paid as a prostitute. So that wasn't cut and dry, but that documentation, the bank statements, the hotel records, and also the flight records clearly is what compelled the jury to convict him on those 2 charges.
I think we're hearing something right now that they're asking for Sean Combs to be released pending the sentencing. I believe you're saying he wants to go back to his home in Miami, which of course was the subject of a lot of discussion. He lives on 1- and 2-star island. Talk about the level of wealth we're talking about here. He will not have access to a plane or the ability to travel, we're being told in my ear right now. And so they're making that request. Now, it is not unheard of for somebody to be released pending sentencing, particularly if they're not sentenced on the far more serious of charges. And remember, part of the consideration for any judge deciding whether somebody will be released and until sentencing is their threat to the community. Do they pose a risk to the community? Do they pose a safety threat to themselves or others? Now, for him to be held on prostitution would suggest that that prostitution or transportation as such would be enough to hold. I'm not familiar with that happening with a lot of different people, so the judge could take into consideration, well, the jury has found they do not pose a threat in this moment in time. They want to set aside or put some conditions of release. It could be an ankle monitor, it could be otherwise, but again, the risk of flight, the posing of a threat to the community, all things that the judge will consider. Can you imagine?
And Laura, I want to read to you the exact quote that comes from our Nikki Brown, who is in that courthouse. This is what Mark Agnifilo, who is Combs' defense attorney, said, quote, "He has been acquitted of very, very serious charges. He has been convicted of a far less serious charge." The judge asking, as Laura just said, "Is your proposal that he leave this courtroom and walk outside?" And Agnifilo said, "Yes, it is." Now, he's right. Agnifilo is absolutely correct that he has been acquitted of the most serious charges, but I still want to underscore the fact that Sean Combs, one of the biggest celebrities in the world, one of the most powerful entrepreneurs and men in the world, has now been convicted. He has been found guilty on 2 sex crimes.